So since receiving my Spawn 4K from Arrow and delving into the special features, most notably that one featurette called The Devil's in the Details, an interview with Greg Nicotero and Howard Berger, I wanted to delve more into the unused concepts and costumes for Spawn 1997. Now, for the most part, we're just going to be talking about Spawn. There were a few earlier concepts of the clown, but also at one point a live-action rod puppet of Mal Bulger, and as we know, that got replaced with state-of-the-art cutting-edge CGI. There are a few things that were shown and mentioned in the featurette. Not only that, there was something that was mentioned to me by Howard Berger when I contacted him in regards to my alternate Spawn mask fiberglass casting. I wanted to confirm that it was indeed made by Howard and the rest of the crew at KMBFX, which he did confirm, and I'll go into detail of what Howard had to say. Also, Mark Tavares, who sculpted this particular piece, as well as the other variations of the Spawn masks, including something that looks a little bit different, and you probably saw it on the thumbnail, but was also mentioned by Howard. So it's so interesting and fascinating to see what could have been, and not just with Spawn, but like other films as well, like even in Nightmare on Elm Street, seeing early concepts of what Freddy could have looked like when David Miller was doing concept sketches, concept sculpts, stuff like that. So when it came to the burnt makeup on Al Simmons, aka Michael Jai White, there was an earlier sculpt that was done just to see how the burns could look and how the form could look. And as you can see right here, this is one of the earlier concept sculpts. It looks so alien-like. To me, it doesn't look like a burnt person. Even though there is burnt scar tissue, it looks more like an alien, just with some interesting looking skin going on, like even scaled at some point. But to me, this does not look like Spawn at all. Interesting, but it could have worked well in, say, like a sci-fi film, you know, a space film, just because of the way the nose is, the lips, everything. It looks very almost reptilian. Now, even looking at some of the earlier maquettes of what the Spawn suit could look like, as you see right here, these are some, I'm going to guess, 1/6 quarter scale maquettes that were made before construction started on the suit. And you can see, like, there's a lot of differences going on compared to the final form suit we got in the film, but it also reminds me of the old school McFarlane toy figures from back in the day, most notably with this one, Samurai Spawn, which I've actually just got up there on my shelf. But it's one of those things where KMB have to explore all these avenues, which brings me to the next concept piece. Did you know they actually sculpted, molded, and cast a comic/figure accurate Spawn suit before we got the final Spawn suit in the film? As you can see right here, KMB went ahead to see if they could make a comic accurate, action figure accurate suit for the film. And whilst this looks great, it looks like a very high-end cosplay, it's one of those things where you look at all the other concepts, all the other final pieces in the film, how detailed, dark, and gothic they are, especially compared to John Leguizamo's look of the clown, the violator, Mal Bulger, even though for the most part it's CGI, even though they did make a live action rod puppet, it just doesn't work in that realm. If this had been, I wouldn't say more lighthearted, but a more comic accurate, and I mean that in the way of it looks like the panels of the comics brought to life, where there's not as much detail going on as opposed to the live action Spawn suit we got in the final cut of the film. But yeah, you can see right here, two artists from KMBFX. One is wearing the final Spawn suit we see in the film, and the other is wearing the comic accurate, figure accurate test suit in the film. Such a stark difference, but cool to see nonetheless, and cool that they even attempted to try and make that work at one point. And then obviously they went on to sculpt the final approved suit, as you can see right here in clay form. Like, look at the detail, man. I think this is one of, I wouldn't say one of the most underrated comic book accurate suits, but I think because the film sometimes gets trashed, then people kind of associate that suit with a very bad film. But I think, and a lot of people will say, one of the standouts in the film is the suits. Not just Spawn, but Clown. But also that rod puppet, Mal Bulger. That would have been sick. Now, when it came to Spawn's mask, not the burnt look, but when the mask comes out, it's all organic and it grows over his burnt skin. There are a few variations, a few test pieces. So You guys, for the most part, know the history with this, but I'll bring it out once again because I just love bringing it out. So this right here is an alternate sculpt. This is called the Battle Mask. So for the most part, it's pretty much the same as the mask we got in the film, except there's a few variations with the white portions, especially here. This is a lot more pronounced, longer, pointy. There are a few variations with the details with the skin. Now, this was sculpted by artist Mark Tavares, who was working at K&B at the time. So even though this wasn't used on film, this was actually used for promotional stuff, most notably the soundtrack of Spawn and also the statue that K&B Effects made for their office. They used this particular sculpt. So Mark Tavares had confirmed he sculpted it, and he went on to say, "Hello, Christopher. It's so formal. Thanks for the kind words. To get right to it, yes, that resin copy was derived from a mold of my sculpture of, I believe, was called the Battle Mask. It's pretty much the only thing I can point to on the film that was totally my contribution. Gino Avedo and Bill Zahn sculpted the costume, while I believe Garrett Amell was responsible for the creation of the Burnt Simmons makeup appliances. All of the clown and violator stuff was created and supervised by Norman Cabrera, Wayne Toth, and a whole host of other artists. I was also tasked with sculpting an angry version, which essentially meant adding clay to the brows and making that look meaner. I didn't really provide much of a difference to the original, so I think it was never used on screen." Now, here's that particular photo of Mark, quote unquote, sculpting this mask. The one in the photo isn't the one used in the film. It's actually this particular battle mask, which is cool. Now, in terms of contacting Howard Berger, he was gracious enough to reply. I sent him photos, said that I'd spoken to Mark Tavares, and this is what Howard had to say. "Hey Chris, this was a version we never used. We did several different versions of the mask, but this was one of them that Mark sculpted. It was definitely made by us, but we never shot it on film. There is even a version where it's completely smooth that got canned right away. There was talk originally that we would have different heads to help stitch any of the visual effects facial expressions together, but in the end, they just did it all digitally. Hope that helps." So the interesting thing is, Howard mentions a smooth version of the mask, and I believe it's this one here that was shown in the featurette, The Devil's in the Details. The first thing I thought of when I saw this, very medieval Spawn, like those variation action figures from McFarlane Toys you'd see back in the day. Even though I ultimately adore and love what we got on film, this is still an interesting choice. It's very much more heading in the direction of hard edge armor, like steel plating on his face. Now also, there's a bit of a shameless plug, but I am offering a limited run of 20 castings of this piece. I'm still yet to make the mold. The listing is currently on my Etsy store, but I figured I'd just like to offer a couple of castings of this piece, and it does come with light up eyes, much like this one here. There you go. This is a big piece too. So, you know, it's one of those things where I'd love to offer it to hardcore Spawn the movie fans. And it's such an awesome piece as well. Even though this design wasn't used on screen, it was still used for other portions of, you know, promotion for the film. Then also the K&B statue that's in their office. Now, another interesting aspect of the suit, the cape. For the most part, we see a live action cape in all the promotional photos. And it actually looks pretty good. But when you think about Spawn's cape, as Greg Nicotero and Howard Berger was saying, it's constantly alive. It's constantly flowing. But before any of that, before the digital cape, K&B made a full-blown live-action cape. They did two variations, just a regular draping cape, but then as you see right here, a full-blown comic accurate, wrapped around in certain areas. There are points. It has almost a mind of its own. If you freeze framed it, that's what it would essentially look like. Supposedly, these capes were coated in latex and they weighed over 150 pounds, which is insane. They then presented it to Mark Dupay, the director, and he said, look, we'll do it for promo photos, but essentially we're just going to digitize the capes. It needs to be constantly flowing. Trying to do that with an over 150 pound latex cape, that would be hard. You need rods, you need armatures, you need probably hydraulics to move it, like, you know, dudes up in the rafters with fishing poles trying to make this thing come alive. Now, when the final look of the suit was approved, it was molded, it was cast, and there were certain paint variations going on, as you can see right here, you know, with a lot more pronounced burgundies going on the shoulders, on the thigh. When they got to set, and I said this in my review of the Spawn 4K Arrow edition, Howard Berger and Greg Nicotero had shreds torn off them by Bob Shea because the suit looked too matte. And as Greg Nicotero said, it looked like a car tire, as you can see right here. So they literally lubed Michael Jai White up with KY jelly, and then the camera just read the suit so much better than it was in matte form. Now, I don't mind a matte looking suit. I think it looks good. This is one of those instances where both matte and gloss work great. Now, when it came to the boots, it's very interesting because this is supposed to be like an organic suit wrapped around Al Simmons. Take a look at the boots. Take a look at the very bottom there. You can see the soles cut out and a trainer under there. Not only that, when Spawn comes crashing through the opening door at the restaurant when the gunfight's going on, and you see Michael Jai White on the ground, look at the soles of his shoes. You can see his runners, his trainers, poking out through the bottom. This is essentially just to ensure that when you're doing a stunt, everything's going to be comfortable. And I think also if they had foam latex going all the way around, it'd be squishing, there'd be no traction, you'd have to put treads on it. So I think just cutting a hole, having the trainers sticking out is going to be a lot more comfortable, practical, and for the most part, you're not going to see it until that shot. I think it doesn't help that this is in 4K. Now, one thing that's always puzzled me, and I've never got an answer, maybe someone in the comments will know. There's two variations of the white tribal markings on the Spawn suit. So take a look here. Here is a shot of Michael Jai White getting suited up with Howard Berger and the KMB Effects crew. Look at the tips of the white portion of the suit. Now take a look at this part of the suit, another suit. There's variations going on here. I don't know if it was one of those things where it kind of just went under the radar and this was a variation they made and it just happened to be used on screen and they just used the both. I don't know. And there you go, guys. I thought I'd just nerd out over some Spawn goodness. Again, I've gone down like this ADHD rabbit hole since obtaining the 4K with those beautiful special features and some never before seen photos, and also just kind of joining the dots, especially with what Howard Berger had to say about that particular smooth looking Spawn mask. But again, I'm glad with what we got on screen. I think it's perfection. And I think it was way ahead of its time for 1997 and a specialty creature suit. Not only that, John Leguizamo as the clown, but also that rod puppet of Malbolgia. What that could have looked like, you know, in comparison to what we got in the final look of the film with a very low budget looking CGI Malbolgia. I think it could have been one of those things where with the rod puppet and the background of the CGI looking hell, it probably wouldn't have worked. It'd be too distracting from a practical puppet to some not so state-of-the-art CGI, even though to them, it was state-of-the-art back then. I just feel like even the original concept of hell for Spawn was going to be a dark room and you just hear Malbolgia. I think that would have been quite interesting had it been lit right and you've got Michael Jai White there and all these beautiful burnt Spawn makeup and then the suit when he obtains the suit. I think that could have looked very interesting. Very artsy, but an interesting concept nonetheless. And originally that was to keep the budget down. As always, guys, thanks very much for watching. Love you guts, and I'll catch you in the next one.